I was sitting alone in my car after losing everything. A homeless man knocked on my window and handed me a folded paper and said, "Someone paid me to give you this." When I opened it, my hands started shaking. I lost my job, my income, and my professional reputation in 22 days. I want to tell you how I got all three back. And I want to start with a man whose name I never learned. Standing outside my car window in a parking lot in Regina in February, holding a folded piece of paper and a yellow glove. Welcome to Eric's Revenge Stories. Drop a comment and make sure to subscribe. You are going to love it here. My name is Wallace Poot. I am 54 years old. I spent the last 19 years as an operations director for a mid-size industrial supply company called Norgate Distribution. We supplied equipment and materials to commercial construction sites across Saskatchewan and into Manitoba. It was not glamorous work. I drove a 7-year-old Silverado. I wore the same for dress shirts on rotation. My wife Diane once described my professional look as business casual. If the business was a tire store, she was not entirely wrong, and I did not entirely disagree. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching this from. I would genuinely love to know. Life before all of this was what I would call quietly good. Diane and I have been married 26 years. We live in a house on the east side of Regina with a backyard that gets too much wind and a kitchen that is slightly too small for two people who both like to cook at the same time. We have argued about that kitchen for a decade. We will probably argue about it for another decade. Our son Marcus is 24 and works in Edmonton. He calls on Sundays, sometimes Saturdays, never Thursdays, for reasons he has never explained, and I have stopped asking about. I had known my business partner Burton Crane for 11 years. We were never close. The way some partners are, Burton was quieter than me, methodical. He handled the investor relationships and the client account side of things. I handled operations. It was a clean division. We shook hands more than we hugged. We had dinner with our wives twice a year and split the bill exactly down the middle. I thought that was just the kind of partnership we were. Straightforward, professional, built on function rather than friendship. I want you to hold that thought because it matters. The first thing I noticed was that 3 of our longest-standing investors stopped responding to my emails in the same week last October. These were not people who went quiet. Gerald Foss had been in contact with us every 2 weeks for 6 years. Sandra Ng replied to everything within the same business day. When they both stopped responding, I mentioned it to Burton. He told me they had been having concerns about operational cost overruns, and that he had been managing the conversations. He said he was handling it. He said it calmly. He said it the way a man says it when he has been handling things for years, and would like credit for that. I thanked him. I went back to my desk. I remember thinking that Burton was better at the soft relationship side of things. Then I gave him credit for. That was a thing I thought. I want you to know that. 2 weeks later, a contract we had held for 4 years with a construction group in Moose Jaw was quietly reassigned to another supplier. We were not given a reason. Burton told me the client had gone in a different direction. The following week, a second contract dropped, this time a commercial build supplier out of Weyburn. Burton said the same thing, different direction. When I pushed for specifics, he said the industry was tightening and we needed to weather it. He said this over the phone. He did not come to the office that week. Looking back, I noticed he stopped coming to the office a lot in those last 2 months. At the time, I thought he was working from home. He was technically, just not for us. My termination came on a Thursday morning in November. The board called me into a meeting I had not been told was happening. Burton was not in the room, which I found strange. They told me that investor confidence in my management of operations had deteriorated significantly, that there were serious concerns about financial discrepancies in the operational budget, and that they were ending my role, effective immediately. They gave me a severance package of $14,000 and a non-disclosure agreement I did not sign. I asked for specifics. I was told the concerns had been documented and formally submitted. I asked who submitted them. The room was very quiet for a long moment, and then the legal representative said the concerns had come from within the organization. That was all they would tell me. I drove out of that parking lot and I sat in the same parking lot 2 blocks away for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I did not call Diane yet. I did not call anyone. I sat with the heater running and I looked at the building I had walked into 5 days a week for 19 years, and I tried to figure out what had just happened to me. I called my friend Dennis Harlow from the car. Dennis and I have known each other since we were both 31, working entry-level jobs at competing companies and complaining about it at the same sports bar. On Friday nights, he picked up on the second ring, which is something Dennis always does. He picked up on the second ring when my father died. He picked up on the second ring when Marcus broke his arm at 14. Dennis Harlow has never once let a call go to voicemail, and I genuinely believe he never will. I told him everything. He was quiet the whole time, which is how I knew he was taking it seriously. When I finished, he said, "Wallace, that does not sound like a business going in a different direction. That sounds like someone moving the pieces before you noticed the board had changed." I told him I did not understand who would do that or why. Dennis said, "Start with who benefits." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said Burton's name out loud for the first time as a question instead of a statement. Dennis said, "Call a lawyer. Before you call anyone else." I drove home and told Diane. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and she listened without interrupting, which Diane almost never does, which told me she understood this was serious. When I finished, she said, "We are not touching the severance that is sitting in a separate account until you know what happened." She said it like it was already decided, which it was. Diane has always been 3 steps ahead of a crisis. It is one of the things I find most useful about her, and occasionally exhausting about her in equal measure. I found Margaret Voss through a commercial litigation firm downtown. Her assistant scheduled me in for 2 days later. Margaret walked into the meeting room carrying a yellow legal pad, a coffee she had clearly already been working on for some time, and the expression of a woman who had heard many stories and been surprised by approximately none of them. She was 51. She had been doing commercial litigation for 24 years. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Tell me everything and do not leave out anything you think is boring, because boring is usually where it lives." I liked her immediately. I told her about the investors going quiet, the contracts dropping, the vague board meeting, and Burton's absence in the weeks leading up to my termination. She made notes without reacting. When I finished, she said the pattern was consistent with what she had seen in cases involving deliberate reputational interference and account redirection. She said we would need documentation. I told her I had almost none. She said that was fine. She said that was what subpoenas were for. She said it the way someone says it when they have said it many times, and it has always worked. I was sitting in that same parking lot 2 blocks from the Norgate building. On a Tuesday morning in February, I had been coming there. I realized the way some people go back to a place where something important happened. I was not doing anything useful. I was drinking a coffee from the Tim Hortons on Albert Street and watching the building and thinking, gee, about nothing in particular. A man in a green jacket and yellow gloves knocked on my passenger window. He was somewhere in his 60s. He had a paper cup in one hand and a small folded piece of paper in the other. I rolled down the window. He said, "Someone paid me $40 this morning to bring this to the man sitting in the gray silver in this parking lot at 11 o'clock. He held out the paper. I took it. He nodded once like the transaction was complete and walked away toward the street. I unfolded it. It was a single printed page. At the top was a company registration record for a business called Crane Allied Supply Ltd. Registered in Saskatchewan 8 months earlier. The director listed was a name I recognized immediately as Burton's nephew, a 29-year-old who worked in logistics, and whose name I had seen on Burton's family Christmas card for 3 years running. Below the registration was a single transfer record. The amount was $214. Zero moved from a Norgate operating account to Crane Allied Supply in 3 separate transfers, across a 6-week window ending 4 days before my termination. At the bottom of the page in plain type were the words, "You already know who did this." I sat in that car and I read that page for more times. My hands were doing something I can only describe as disagreeing with the rest of me. I called Margaret Voss. She subpoenaed Crane Allied Supply's financial records within the week. A forensic accountant named Paul Driscoll, who Margaret brought in and who spoke exclusively in numbers and complete sentences with no emotion whatsoever, spent 3 weeks going through everything. What he found was that 11 contracts, including the 2 I had been told were simply going in different directions, had been quietly redirected to Crane Allied Supply over a 14-month period. The total financial value of those redirected contracts was $960,000. The investor communications that had caused the board to lose confidence in me had been sent from an account Burton had constructed to appear as though the concerns were coming from multiple independent sources. They were not. They were coming from Burton. The civil claim was filed for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and intentional interference with business relations. Burton's legal team attempted twice to negotiate a private settlement. Margaret rejected both offers without calling me first, which I later asked her about. She said neither number was serious and she did not want to waste my afternoon. I told her she was exactly the kind of lawyer a person hopes to find. She said she knew. The court ruled in full. Burton was ordered to pay $960,000 in restitution plus $112,000 in legal costs. Crane Allied Supply was placed under permanent injunction and dissolved the board at Norgate. Once the full record was made public through the court proceedings, issued a formal written statement clearing my name and acknowledging that the concerns used to justify my termination had been fabricated. That statement went on the public record. I made sure of that specifically. Margaret made sure of that specifically. Burton lost everything he had built at Crane Allied Supply before it generated its first full quarter of independent revenue. His nephew resigned as director before the injunction was finalized and has not been publicly associated with the matter since. I do not know what Burton's life looks like now. I have not looked. Dennis called me the day the ruling came through. He said, "Wallace, I wanted on the record that I told you to start with who benefits." I told him that was technically correct. He said he was going to want that acknowledged at dinner. I said I would acknowledge it at dinner once. He said he would probably bring it up more than once. I told him that was also correct and that I had already accepted it. I used the settlement to establish my own operation. Food supply and distribution opened in Regina 11 months after the ruling. We now hold contracts with 7 commercial construction clients, 3 of whom were previously Norgate accounts who came back once the public record was clear. I drive the same 7-year-old Silverado. Diane says this is a character flaw. I say it still runs fine. She says that is not the point. We have been having this conversation for 3 months, and I suspect we will have it for 3 more. Diane and I were sitting in the backyard on a Saturday evening in September, the first warm night of the year that actually felt like summer was trying. She had a glass of wine. I had a beer. She was reading something on her phone. I was watching the neighbor's cat walk along the fence line, with the particular confidence of an animal that has never once doubted its own decisions. She looked up and said, "You know what the best part of all of this is?" I said, "The $960,000. She said, "No. It is that you were sitting in that parking lot doing nothing useful and somehow the answer still found you." I told her I preferred to think of it as strategic patience. She looked at me over the top of her phone with an expression that has meant the same thing. For 26 years, I drank my beer. The cat made it to the end of the fence and jumped down into the neighbor's yard like it had somewhere important to be. Maybe it did. I stopped questioning things that just work.